baseline iPad Air from 2022. It comes with an M1 processor and 64GB of storage at its base model. I actually upgraded from my iPad Pro 2020, which had 128GB of storage. For some people this may seem like a downgrade, but the reason I chose to go with something like the iPad Air was because I wanted to use all of those Apple Intelligence features, which are restricted to things above an M1 processor. But that actually got me thinking. In 2024, is 64GB of storage going to be enough, especially for something like an iPad? Hello everybody, my name is Robert and this is Bite Size Clue. So let's take this baseline 64GB model here. After you've installed the OS and other things that Apple requires, you're going to be left with about 50GB of storage. Now that really isn't much space, especially when we're starting to think of multimedia and games on an iPad. Let's take a look at that gaming, because gaming has been a big thing on the M chips recently. Apple have decided that they want to start breaking into AAA games, with games like Assassin's Creed and Resident Evil coming to the M-powered devices. These games are coming in at 30 or 40GB. That means that you're basically only going to be able to fit one game on an iPad that has 64GB of storage at a time. This might not be a big problem to you, but if you're wanting to have more than one game or more than a handful of games on your device at once, you're going to have to start to look at a much bigger storage device by default. Okay, but who really games on their iPad? Perhaps you use it for multimedia, like I do. I do some of my editing of thumbnails and videos on the iPad. These are normally my shorts videos rather than my full-length ones. I normally do that on my Mac. But things like Final Cut Pro, Procreate, and Adobe Lightroom, these apps can be pretty lightweight, coming in at maybe a gig or two in size. But once you start to factor in things like the raw footage in terms of video files and photos, these are going to start to take up a lot of space. I have a 3TB hard drive downstairs that is absolutely full of the last 3 years of Review Clue videos. And that's just something that I would never be able to hold on the iPad. 50GB of storage is basically one video for me these days. Okay, but what if we start to think about something like Icloud? Because apps like Procreate and Final Cut Pro and even Lightroom can use your iCloud storage. You can actually edit directly off of your iCloud storage and then push back up when you're done. This is fine, but it does mean that you aren't going to be able to hold all your files at once. You have to kind of selectively download what you want and then remove it when you're done. It's an okay model, but honestly, if you're wanting to access a lot of data at once, 64GB is just not enough. What if you're a more casual user, like my wife or my grandmother? She basically uses her iPad to do a Google and watch a few YouTube videos. My grandmother, not my wife. My wife's not that bad. Well, in that case, 64GB of storage is probably going to be enough. You could easily fit tens of thousands of books on something like a 64GB iPad. And when you're using web apps or just using YouTube and Netflix and not downloading any of this content, then you're going to find that 64GB is absolutely ample in terms of storage. But if you're really into your multimedia and let's say you've got a long 10-hour flight ahead of you and you want to download some films from Netflix and Amazon Prime Video, these files are again very big files. Once you've downloaded a film or two, you're almost running out of storage again. And this is becoming a really big problem. At least now Apple have sort of acknowledged this. The iPad Air models that you can buy right now, the 2024 ones, actually come in as a standard 128GB. This is ample. This is much more than most users will need. If you're using more than 128 or maybe 256GB of storage on something like an iPad, then perhaps you might want to start looking at something like an external drive to run everything off of. Every iPad has one of these USB-C ports now, so you can just run everything off of external drives. Unfortunately, you can't install apps onto external drives, so this really doesn't account for things like gaming, but when it comes to videos and consuming and editing media, you can absolutely do that off of something like an external drive. So if you're looking for advice when purchasing an iPad in 2024, I would always recommend that you look at one of those additional storage options. A 64GB may seem like enough data for you, but quite honestly, for 9 out of 10 people, it's not going to be enough. If this is going to someone like your grandmother or someone who isn't going to be using a lot of apps, they'll be using YouTube or web apps, then 64 gigabytes is probably enough. But for most people, 128 should be the minimum, and Apple knows this. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with me that 64 gigabytes of storage in 2024 just isn't enough? What do you think should be the default model? Why don't you let me know in the comment section down below, and of course, while you're down there, get subscribed as well, because it genuinely does mean the world to me. Anyway guys, my name's been Robert, this has been Bite Size Clue, and I will catch you in the next one. Adios.